Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. In my previous podcast, I was talking about this anonymous source on Reddit who claimed to be a molecular biologist who worked on extraterrestrial corpses at the Batil National Biodefense Institute. Uh, some people say he could be telling the truth. Some people say that he could be lying. It's a hoax. And then some people say they're not sure. In the not sure category, I would say maybe. But besides all of that, right? Regardless if this guy is telling the truth or if he's just someone who is pretending that he was a molecular biologist that worked for the government, he did present some interesting ideas. Regardless, and I mean, a lot of the things on my show here is based on speculation. I speculate a lot on what's going on with these uh, alien beings, these visitors that are here, and what they're up to. I always have different ideas with regard to that I present. Now, regardless of whether you believe this guy is a real molecular biologist who worked for the government, well, I'm not. I can't say that. I don't know. I mean, he doesn't provide a name. There's no any sort of documentation to back up what he says. Uh, and there is a possibility then that it could be just a hoax and that he sat down. It's somebody who understands genetics and biology at a minimum and was able to come up with this, if it's a hoax, come up with this whole story and lay it out there for the world to argue about. So I'm actually in the maybe category. This guy could be telling the truth, or maybe he's not. I guess I don't think we're ever going to really know because he said he's not going to ever reveal who he really is. I mean, I guess the only way we'll find out is if there are other people who step forward and say, "Yeah, this guy, everything he said is correct, and I worked there too." And here's some documentation and some photographs and some other evidence to back up what he says. That's the only way you'd ever figure it out. Now, I've received different kind of messages from people. Some people saying this guy's outright hoaxing. Could be. Like I said, I don't know. I'm just saying maybe. I mean, I'm in the maybe category, right? Because I just don't know. Okay, so that could be. Yes, I totally agree. Yes, it could be a lie. And then there's some people saying he sounds legitimate, right? If you go online, there are some people who are scientists. Some of them say that it sounds like he might be telling the truth, and then some of the other ones are saying no. There's a bunch of red flags. I've said all of this yesterday, but all besides all of that, there were some interesting concepts that he presents in there that had me thinking today. And I want to talk about those. But before we do, I just want to go to a recent poll on this to show where everybody is with regard to this. And it's actually pretty interesting results so far. And let me pull it up on the screen here. So far, there at this point, at the time that I'm recording this podcast, 46 people have voted on this poll, and the question is the alleged Reddit molecular biologist who claims to have studied extraterrestrial bodies for the government legitimate? So 46 votes, and so far, 18 people say maybe, or 39.1%, 15 people say no, or 32.6%, and 13 people say yes, or 28.3%. So I thought that was interesting. That's probably, of all the polls I've ever done, I've never had one that was that close with regard to three answers. Like usually, there's usually one or two things that might be close in the amount of votes, but this is the first time we had three of them. In fact, earlier today it was almost a three-way tie with that. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, I was thinking about it. Now I'm going to pull up some comments that this guy had shared in that post, and I want to point out. I actually copied and pasted the ones I want to focus on into a Google Doc, so we could just look at ones what I want to focus on here. Focus on what I want to focus on. Anyway, he wrote, "What's particularly striking about the EBO genome is the uniformity of these intergenic regions. We see the same sequences repeated everywhere, and the distance in BP between the genes is virtually the same throughout their genome. The result is a minimalist, highly condensed genome. In fact, it's much smaller than ours. Moreover, the quantity of protein coding genes is even significantly lower than ours, probably due to genetic refinement, but also to biological processes that are absent in EBO. The uniformity of these sequences is a major indication of the artificiality of these beings. There is no complex organism on Earth that has such elegance in its sequences. There is no evolutionary pressure that can lead to this kind of characteristic other than genetic engineering." So we'll get back to this in a second, but I want to talk about what they're what this brings to mind here. Like, now in the past we've been talking about these alien beings and how they eat and what they eat and how do they survive and things like that. But there's one thing I've never really talked about, and I don't think most many people you ever hear talking about this mention is the fact that I mean these things are what this guy's describing here is things that a lot of us have already thought of, that these things are genetically engineered, that these little gray beings, the short 3.5 to 4 foot tall beings with 4 fingers. Now of course there are some that apparently have 3 digits, because the one that I saw when I was a kid only had 3 digits. I've talked about that before. And of course, during an interview I had with Preston Dennett, a UFO investigator, he told me that yes, there are beings out there that have been reported that have only 3 digits on their hands. But regardless, what these little beings are, the 3.5 to 4 foot tall, big headed, big eyed beings, they seem to be like worker bees for other creatures, right? That's what it seems like. We've talked about this numerous times on the show before, and you've heard people like Gary Nolan of Stanford say that these things could be biological robots. And we also wonder about things about, like, what did they eat? What do these beings eat, right? And I've talked about that before, and maybe that the tie-in with cattle mutilations and what these beings eat, that's all tied together actually. So, like, for instance, uh, maybe that's what they use that blood as nourishment for these creatures. I mean, maybe they drink some sort of a liquid, or maybe they uh, some sort of a paste, because later on I'll get into the description there. It talks about that these things have no teeth, that there's uh, nothing that they could chew with, and some theories that I have put forward before is that some alien abductees that have been brought on craft have seen these beings in tanks, and we speculated. I speculated, along with some other people in this world, have speculated that maybe what's going on here is that they're actually absorbing nutrition through their skin. Now I want to go back to that comment here, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here. So you see what I'm talking about. Okay. It says here, continuing here, it says, given the absence of teeth, the narrowness and rigidity of the esophagus, the absence of a true stomach, and the absence of defecation, it is strongly believed that EBOs can only consume food in liquid form. It is assumed that, given the high metabolic needs of their brains, this food would have a high carbohydrate concentration. In order to meet their metabolic needs, there must also be a high protein content in the food consumed. These two statements are supported by the type of enzymes secreted by the digestive organ. It is therefore speculated that the food consumed is a sort of broth rich in sugar and protein, which probably also has a high copper content. Given the strict limitations of the type of food they can consume, it's unlikely that this type of creature could survive in our biosphere without technological support. So, basically, these things, what they're saying here is that what this guy's saying, whether he's telling us a true story based on personal experiences, or basically he's just speculating as part of his hoax, whatever the case, it's still interesting, right? It's no different than the way I speculate about things on here in a way. I mean, I'm on different aspects of this whole phenomenon and these beings. So it makes sense, though. Okay, now I used to think that maybe these tanks were used um, as some way of introducing nutrition into the bodies of these things. But I mean, what if they do take nourishment through the mouth, a liquid form, maybe something, a mixture of perhaps the blood from cattle and along with some other things, sugar or whatever. They come up with some sort of concoction in a liquid or maybe even a paste form, and they eat very little. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because what's interesting is something we never really talk about, and it's the how do these things excrete? Now, according to this guy, this anonymous source, he's saying that there's no anus, no genitalia. Now, we've heard this before from in different publications and different literature of with regard to aliens, that there's no genitalia. Ever noticed in these things? Now, this guy's saying there's no anus or genitalia. Now let's just suppose now, like, okay, so let's and they secrete through their skin, but there's some sort of a film covering, according to this guy, there's some sort of film over their skin that prevents anything from coming out. So if that is true, right? If this, whether it's speculation or whether it's true, whatever the case, if that's how they excrete, right, rather than, because they don't have an anus, so they can't defecate the way human beings do or any other kind of life form, animal kind of life form on this planet does. So they do it through their skin, and it's all, and it must be. But what prevents it from escaping, like becoming, you could smell it, or rubbing up against something or whatever. They have this film that keeps it in, prevents it from uh, leaving any traces, I guess, would be the best way to put it. And it makes you wonder. It actually makes sense if you were some alien race and you were coming here and you were up to some secretive operation on this planet. You wanted to do, for instance, say a hybridization program, and you had your little biological robots. You send them out to do the menial tasks, the abduction, the actual abducting and carrying victims onto a craft to do what you're going to do to them. Right? You have to make sure, if you're going to genetically engineer something to for those tasks, you want to have them so they can't leave any traces of anything behind. And that's how you might do it when you really think about it, right? Okay, they excrete through their skin, so what you do, you have this film over their body so it doesn't come out of their arms, right? Or their legs, or wherever it's going to go, through the pores on their bodies. There's this film that keeps that in, and then later on, maybe at certain, who knows, maybe daily, maybe every other day, who knows how often, but these little worker bees, these little grays, are placed in these tanks where there's a fluid in there that opens up their pores, and the excrement, the liquid excrement, because there's no solid excrement apparently, would just flow out of those pores, and then maybe there's some sort of a cleaning solution in there too. I mean, who knows? Maybe, but what really happening? They're not feeding; they're actually excreting. They're not feeding tanks; they're excrement tanks, right? And maybe they get rid of it. Maybe they, after a while, they dump it into the ocean, or wherever, right? Uh, where it gets diluted and nobody knows any, but nobody ever finds any evidence of it, right? I mean, I remember when I was a reporter, I worked, I would, in addition to covering council meetings, I would cover things like the sewage treatment plant board hearings and things like that, and I would talk to the sewage treatment manager at different sewage treatment plants. And I remember the one guy would always say, "Dilution is the solution," right? That was a saying. So basically, once you get rid of, once the sewage gets put through the treatment plant, then you what they do, then it gets put into a stream, or wherever, right? uh, where it's diluted, it's cleaned up, and then discarded. And maybe this is their form, this is how they do it, these extraterrestrial beings, they do it. Because let's face it, okay, if you're going to have these little uh, robots, basically these biological robots, entering a home to abduct people on regular bases, right? You're not going to want any accidents, okay? I mean, for instance, say there's three little gray beings that were going to abduct Junior some night, right? And they go sneaking into his room, but these biological robots have anuses and genitalia. You never know; there might be an accident in the struggle with Junior as they're getting him out the door. Maybe one of these beings might pinch a loaf right there on the floor, right? By designing them this way, where they excrete through the skin, and you cover the skin with some sort of a film to prevent it from escaping from the being itself, and then cleaning them up later, you prevent that kind of accident from ever happening, because that would constitute proof, right? Any sort of dropping from an alien during an abduction experience, that could lead to that would be evidence to prove that there's something going on, that this experience is real. And the same would be for, like, say an alien was in the middle of an abduction and it had to take a leak, right? You don't want that little biological robot finding Junior's little mason jar halfway filled with coins and taking care of business there. That would be leaving evidence. By creating beings that excrete through the skin this way, and you cover the skin with a film to prevent it from escaping anywhere, well, that takes care of that problem. And when you think about the Varginha case, now this person here was talking about the ammonia uh, smell, just similar to what we talked about in the Varginha case, where there's this odor of ammonia that was smelled. Some of the witnesses smelled from these beings. There's a strong ammonia scent. Well, maybe this thing crashed in Virginia, and maybe this film on some of these beings was ripped off or taken off, torn off, whatever, right? And that's why they were able to smell this horrible ammonia smell, because you were smelling the excretion that was coming through their pores. Now, again, this person, again, could be telling the truth about this, or he could just be speculating as part of his hoax. But whatever the case, it doesn't really matter. It's still something interesting to ponder, because, again, we don't. I mean, it does make sense when you really think about it. If you were to, if say the human race was to travel out to the stars somewhere, we decided to, you know what, we found these intelligent beings, but we don't want them to know about us. So we're going to, and we want to manipulate these beings. We want to create our own hybridization program. We want to make these beings that are, maybe they're like half ape, half human, but we want to make them fully like us now. We want to make them like this. So we would be maybe doing the same kind of program as these alien beings are up to here, right? So we won't want to send just people like us to do it. We want to send something like these biological robots, these little gray beings, to do the menial labor, and have them designed in such a way that they leave no trace behind of their, no evidence whatsoever. They could leave nothing behind that would prove that they were there. I guess it's just something to think about. Now, in addition to talking about this ridiculous, I know it sounds ridiculous to some. I mean, the idea that the possibility, if these things were more designed like we were, if they were closer in genetically like we were, and they did have anuses, and they, again, you have to think about it. That could possibly lead to proof, because you never hear any stories, actually, right, of somebody finding excrement from an alien, right? You never really hear that, right? So there could be something to that. I mean, there really could be something to that. Again, regardless of that, whether that guy was a hoaxer or just or really worked there, it doesn't matter. Whatever the case, it does present some interesting ideas and interesting concepts and something to think about. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest here is that these tanks that have been seen filled with liquid, and where beings would be inside these tanks, just floating inside these tanks filled with liquid, what they are really, they're not feeding. That's not nutrition. No, they're not feeding tanks. They're excreting tanks, right? Basically, that's where they get the chance that these little beings, the worker bees, the little grays, get a chance to uh, excrete whatever inside them, uh, clean themselves up, and then get redressed with the film and get back out to business again, back to work. Okay, that's what they might be, and they actually do eat through their mouths, and it could be a combination of high protein. That sounds like it could be a mixture of the blood from cattle, and they're talking about sugar. Well, that's what this whole thing might be about. The whole thing, the cattle mutilations are to provide food for these beings. That's what it could be. I mean, in addition to and it could be more than just the worker bees. It could be food that's generated maybe for the praying mantises and the reptilians as well. We just don't know. But again, it's all speculation. It's something to think about. And actually, I did. I asked. I do, of course, the one anonymous source that I talk about regularly, the retired electronics engineer from that did work for NASA, DARPA, the CIA, along with other weapons manufacturers, private contractors for the government. I contacted him about this. I asked him for his opinion on it, and he read through that, and he did provide me some. He provided me a response, and I want to go through that response right here. Give me 1 second, and we will check it out. Okay. Yes. Okay. He goes through some of the comments that were made by this anonymous source, and then provides his response. Okay. He says, and then later at the end, he provided his assessment. Okay. He says the author says that 4 rather mangled bodies were examined, and my anonymous source's comments were, this is possibly the original 4 from Roswell. And he goes on, the EBO molecular biologist said the DNA of the creatures is relatively simple and appears to be designed to be easily modified as desired. And my source says this suggests other variations can be easily created, such as tall grays. Another interesting point. The alleged molecular biologist says the sections of their DNA which enable the creatures to exist on Earth appear to have been recently inserted. These creatures could only be a result of genetic engineering. The response from my source is no surprise. The alleged molecular biologist says the body is covered with a protective gray biosynthetic film, literally grown in place. The actual body is white in color, has many pores, and emits the smell of ammonia. The head has two large eyes, two nostrils with no nose, two auditory passages with no external ears, and no tongue or teeth. The eyes are covered with a black protective film. They contain six types of receptors, making their vision capable of perceiving a somewhat broader spectrum. The inner ear is similar to humans, but is more sensitive to low frequencies. The brain is about 20% larger than a human equivalent and is divided into four sections with unusual nodules on the stem. It was speculated that these nodules permit them to interface with their technology, although they can't be confirmed. The neck is long and thin compared to a human, and there are no vocal cords. There are no nipples, no navel, no genitals, and no anus. The hands have three long fingers and a thumb. There are no nails, and the fingerprints resemble concentric circles. The feet appear to have two large toes, which are actually each composed of two digits fused together. My source responds to that saying, but I saw three toes in the footprints I examined back in 1997. Now he's talking about my source had an experience back in 1997 living in Arizona where something, what he said was praying mantis alien was scratching at his window and then took off in a craft. And I've talked about this before in the show. And then when he went outside, he saw the footprints, and there was three toes in the footprints. Okay, back to the molecular biologist, the alleged molecular biologist. He says the skeleton is relatively similar to a human's, but the bones contain no marrow and don't produce blood as human bones do. The creatures have lungs through which a continuous flow of air is maintained by a vibrating section of lung wall. They therefore do not inhale or exhale as humans do. The creatures have a heart and circulatory system. However, the blood has a much higher level of plasma, as well as a high level of copper, which gives it a brownish color. Body waste in the form of ammonia is filtered out of the blood and excreted through the pores, where it also provides cooling by the process of evaporation. And then my source points out, and the ammonia smell. And then it says, back to the alleged molecular biologist, the digestive system is very minimalistic to the effect that the creatures can only consume nutrition in liquid form. This nutrition likely consists of a high concentration of sugar and carbohydrates with some copper. And my source says, not sure if they only drink it or also soak it in. And now that's where I'm saying now, I'm not sure they do soak it in. If this, we're just going by, this is all speculation. If these tanks might not be for drinking, for nutritional purposes, it might be for excreting things from the body. Right, that's what it might be for. And then they do eat. Maybe they eat liquid, take liquid through their mouths. Okay, now the alleged molecular biologist says the creatures are unable to live independently without proper technological support. They appear to have short lives and are disposable. The best hypothesis is that they are alive only to accomplish their task. And my source says, add it onto that, as we have already realized. And then the molecular biologist says it was speculated that the creatures have no individuality, do not fear, my source says, or understand. So what the molecular biologist is saying, they do not fear or understand death, and consequently, they have no regard for the welfare of other creatures. They simply carry out instructions. And then my source offered some conclusions. He said, well, first, I have no doubt that this was written by someone with an expert knowledge of genetics and microbiology. It took me a while to look up some of the more complex stuff and try to reduce his long paragraphs into simpler terms. For the most part, the physical characteristics he described are a close match with what we've already deduced from the reports of abductees. There wasn't much new. I was hoping for something to definitely link the collection of blood to the creature's feeding habits, but that wasn't stated explicitly. explicitly. I think it's pretty safe to say these things are clones. They have little value to whoever creates them, and they exist only to perform tasks outside the hive, like worker bees. I suppose the real question is, where do the mantises fit in? Are they the top dogs in the hive? I don't see an AI behind it. This culture seems to use biological techniques, whereas an AI would tend to build mechanical robots, I think. So I'm betting this is an insectoid operation with a hive mentality and a more or less instinctive expansion agenda. There's obviously a lot we still don't know. Okay, that was from my anonymous source on this. So I guess what do we say about all this? Let's try to wrap it all up. Okay, what could be happening here? Okay, this is all pure speculation. Okay, what's happening here? What's been happening here? Um, if if we go by this again, now see, even my anonymous source isn't sure. Obviously the person who wrote that has some knowledge in biology and genetics, obviously, or or maybe taught himself it. Who knows how it happened? But or maybe he really is a molecular biologist and he really is telling us the truth. We just don't know, and I don't see how anybody could know. That's my argument. But regardless, it doesn't matter. Let's look at we could like I've speculated on this before, and I'll speculate on it again. What could be happening here? What might be the case? Well, what might be the case is that these beings are here at some sort of a hybridization program, just like explained by Dr. David M. Jacobs, among others researchers who've come to these kind of conclusions that there could be a hybridization program ongoing, and uh, and these beings, these gray beings that people see a lot during abduction events, are just robots, basically biological robots, just as described by Gary Nolan, right? And they're sent out to do the menial tasks, to do the abducting. They bring them inside the ship, and where there are taller grays that perform the removal of sperm and eggs from victims, from abductees. Uh, but maybe but those taller grays could just be a different version of the smaller grays, and they could be just biological robots too. That's what it could be, right? And are the mantises, right? And maybe the reptilians too. Now, David Jacobs talked about the reptilians, that maybe the reptilians are, just another biological robot too, potentially. We just don't know. But it seems like, according to the different abductees that were hypnotized by Jacobs, what it seems like is that the mantises are in control. Are the mantises the ones responsible? That's the big question. We don't know. Are they the ones pulling all the strings, right? Are they the ones in charge of this hybridization program for themselves? Or is there a chance that they might be working for some other being that we just have no idea about? We just don't know. A lot of questions, no answers. But it makes sense, though, doesn't it? Some of the things that we're talking about here today, like the idea that these beings are excrete through their skin, that possibility. And maybe if that's the case, maybe these tanks that abductees see them in sometimes they're actually excreting. They're not for nourishment. They're not collecting nourishment while they're in these tanks. They're actually excreting, right? And they're getting clean and getting prepared and getting for their next mission, right? That could be the case. It's, again, all pure speculation. We don't know. So I guess the question is what's happening here? If these beings, they're able to genetically engineer these kind of beings to do these kind of tasks, to read people's minds, to basically control people. These beings are not only they might be biological robots, right? That might be the case, but at the same time, these beings are endowed with certain abilities. Okay, at the same time, as many abductees have reported, they could stop you from moving. They could paralyze you. They could make you do things you don't want to do. You could drive off a highway, off into a dirt road somewhere while you're driving, and not even realize what you're doing. So it's incredible as it may sound. It sounds insane, actually, but there is something here. That's the bottom line. There is some non-human intelligence at work here. We just don't know uh, the extent of it. We know somewhat of the hierarchy based on the reporting by Jacobs, for instance. We know that there's the small grays, the tall grays, the reptilians, and the praying mantises. And there's been reports of other kinds of beings too, here and there, right? There's all kinds, but they're the predominant ones, right? They're the most seen kind, the most reported kind. And it makes sense, doesn't it? If they were designed without anuses or genitalia, it makes sense now. The idea would be to prevent any sort of accident, any sort of evidence. There's always a possibility that evidence could be left behind if they were designed in a different way than they are, uh, allegedly, right? We don't really know, but it's something to think about. Like I said again, I mean, it just wouldn't do to have an extraterrestrial gray sneaking into somebody's bedroom in the middle of the night, and maybe that person doesn't, maybe for some reason are not able to put that person under control that night, and that person fights back, which we have heard stories about people punching them in the face, things like that happening before, right? In fact, I know Preston Dennett did a whole video about people who have fought back, punched aliens in the face. So say you get say an alien gets into an altercation with some intended abductee, right? And it doesn't go, things don't go as planned. The next thing you know, there's a fight, and maybe the alien drops a loaf, right? That evidence, that loaf there, that loaf left behind, right? That could prove that there is something going on here. I mean, I'm sure it would be loaded with all sorts of DNA, right? I'm sure it would be rich with proof for any sort of uh, biologist to determine that this isn't from this earth, whatever this thing is, right? I mean, so that's why they've been designed this way, possibly, right? They've been designed this way to excrete through their skin. And and in a way where it could get held in by some sort of film, apparently that might grow back. They might actually grow this film over them. Maybe that's amazing, but we don't know how it operates. We just don't know. But it's something to think about. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Until next time.